Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. My name is Rishi Shah and I am a sales engineer here at YCharts. Hosting our webinar today is my colleague Zach Bates, a senior customer success manager on our team. For today's topic, we're extremely excited to take a closer look at the new and improved fundamental charting feature. Throughout the webinar, we'll have a live Q&A via chat where you can ask questions in the section to the lower right corner of the screen. We will answer some of those questions at the end of Zach's demonstration. Any questions that are not answered during the Q&A session at the end will be answered by your support contact. Please keep in mind that the content of this webinar is meant for educational purposes only and is not intended to be used as investment advice, nor is YCharts acting as an advising party regarding client funds in any way. Finally, as always, a recording of the webinar will be made available on the website and sent to all attendees. Now I'm going to pass things off to Zach to get started.
Thanks, Rushi. So today, as Rushi mentioned, I'd like to reintroduce our fundamental charts, which have seen several key enhancements. Charting is in our name for a reason, and we're thrilled to be releasing these changes that so many of our clients have been requesting. So the format for today is we're going to break it into three major examples, show the finished product in the chart, and then take a step back and reintroduce how to go about recreating that. We're going to study annualized fund performance in a list in one example, show our new annotating of earnings and dividend events and charting estimates in another, and then for the third example, correlate economic indicators and overlay the recessionary time periods for that. And then finally, show how that can all be transformed into a client-friendly presentation. So let's get started. So in this first example, what we're going to illustrate is an example where mutual fund list has been put together and you've queued it up in order to compare it to the S&P via the Spy Etf over a recovery period, in this case, after the 2008 recession for the next 2 years. A couple of new things to highlight here. These hashed lines that we've introduced are going to represent, in this case, the high point, average, and low point for the Spy Etf. And these lines can be annotated onto any line that we've calculated here on one of our charts. Additionally, we also have a section up here that's new as well that's going to show you the annualized return data based on the time frame you've selected. Lastly, under our date range drop down here, we have a new full year option that lets you pick specific calendar years to target your date range. So let's take a step back and talk about how we can recreate a graph like this. By clicking the Reset All button in the upper right-hand corner, we can start from scratch. So our first step is going to be adding the Spy Etf back in here, and that's very simple. You're going to put the ticker into the security search bar and then click on the result. At that point, what we'd like to do is pull in our list browser through this list button here and pull up the fund watch list that we've already created. Once we've done that, what we're going to do is see a resulting level for the price of the Spy Etf as well as the price for the first fund on our list. Now, in order for these to line up and be meaningful, I'm going to scroll down to the left-hand side here and change the data format from original to normalized. This is a very effective way to take very different metrics and really focus on the percent change that they've had over time. Next, I'm going to go up to the date range drop down here, change to a full year option, open the select drop down, and focus in on purely 2009 and 2010. Now we're almost there, but a new feature we have that's very exciting is this Annotate tab that's been added next to Input. By clicking on Annotate, I'm now able to pick specific lines that I would like to add to our chart. So in this case, for our security list, I'm going to choose the average line so that we get that hash dotted line we had seen in the finished chart. But while we're here, I want to point out that this is also where you would choose your minimum and maximum lines, as well as in the next example, we're going to be talking about our earnings, dividend, and split spin-off event annotations, and eventually how to override our normalized changes. But for now, we're just going to click average. You're going to then see this purple hashed line that represents our average line for, in this case, Eventide. I'm going to now go ahead into the next and just simply add the minimum, maximum, and average as well. Once we've done that, we can now see those nice dashed lines that give us a sort of example of visual representation of the high, low, and the average. The final step, and a new feature we have as well, is going to be found under our chart options dropdown here. At the very bottom, we have a new option that's going to allow us to take this annualized data and calculate that as well. You can then see those results here. At this point, we've recreated our graph, and it's a very simple process. Now, don't worry, for anyone who's familiar with our fundamental charts, although we have a new look and design with some better colors and a much more modern interface, all of the old functions you know and love are still going to be there. Just because we don't cover them in today's webinar, don't worry too much about that. They're still there. All right, so let's move on to the next example. In this example, we're looking at a couple of stocks and their revenue, including a new estimate line, using this hashed line in the upper right-hand corner over here. So in any case that we have an estimate that we can calculate for the metric we've charted, we now have the ability to also include that visually, represented by these dashed lines. It makes it very easy to communicate what you're visually trying to accomplish with those estimates. At the bottom section in the second graph, you're going to see these different earnings event annotations that have been put. And what those are going to do is show you the date when earnings was announced, as well as the quarter that it represents for. This can also be done with dividends. In this case, we're going to see the date of the dividend as well as the value. So let's take a step back and talk about how to recreate this. I'm going to go ahead and reset all again. Simply add back in the specific stocks we were working on. Move down to our financial metrics section so that we can add back in our revenue. And I'm also going to throw in total return price in this case. In order to get that nice split view that we had earlier, I'm going to scroll down to the left-hand side to the panel layout and switch to panel per financial metric. It's really going to make it much more visually clear what we're comparing side by side. At this point, in order to get the estimate data that we're looking at, I would need to go up to my chart options dropdown and check this new box here for showing forward estimates. You can now see that hashed lines appeared. So in our example, we did switch it to 3 years, so I would like to highlight we still have the ability to very easily pick a specific periodic time period. And then the final necessary step would be to jump back into Annotate here to add those earnings and dividend event annotations. In this case, going down to Ecolab, hitting the plus, and choosing earnings. Following a very similar approach, we can add Poly1's dividends. And there we have it. Very easy process for zooming in and taking a look at how is the price responded prior to, leading up to, and after earnings, as well as during dividend payout time periods. All right, so for our final example, we have a very nice chart here that's going to be used to show a correlation between the 10-2 Treasury yield spread as well as US GDP, a very common requested correlation graph that we've had from many of our clients. Another thing to notice here is that we're now in presentation view, and what that's going to represent is a final product which allows for adding things like a title, a logo, which you can send very easily to your support representative and they can tag that into your account. And then you can also add notes down at the bottom of your chart as well. These are done with the title and notes update fields. At this point as well, you can also open the chart sizes to change to a different chart pixel width in order to use the chart in different digital means. We also see these gray vertical bars that are going to represent different recessionary time periods over this 40-year horizon we're looking at. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to recreate this graph from scratch. By hitting Reset All, I can then very easily throw back on the different securities we had. So that we can compare them. Now for economic data, we typically like to see a longer time period to understand what that correlation would look like. So what I'm going to do is go to our date range and go and select a 40-year time period by scrolling through this year back to 1978. And let's do December 31st. I'm going to then choose the same date 40 years later. So that's a better horizon, gives us a better understanding of the correlation. But if we'd actually like to calculate that, and that's where our ratio, spreads, and correlations section comes in. By clicking Create here, and then toggling over to the Correlation tab, we have the ability to calculate that line. So in this case, we're going to take the correlation of the 10-2 Treasury yield spread and US GDP. Once we have those selected, we'll see that there's a not applicable sign in our metric. That is key because economic indicators are themselves a metric line, so they don't require a metric. Once I click Submit, we're going to see our nice correlation line graph down here at the bottom so that we can see at any given point in time what that correlation was and where it is today. Now another step we took was under the Chart Options drop-down, the ability to show US recessions. This is one of our most popular features, especially when looking at economic indicators and long-term indices like the Russell 3000, because it gives you an idea of how they've performed during these different time periods. Now during this process, we also want to take a look at the percent change of US GDP as well as the Russell 3000, so we're going to go ahead and normalize this graph. One of our other key new features is the ability through annotations to override on an individual line basis this normalized change. And I highlighted that briefly earlier, but in this case what we're going to do is take the 10-2 Treasury yield spread and unnormalize it, because it really doesn't make sense in this case. So by going to Annotate, we can go ahead and toggle on Override Normalized Change and click Add. The chart will then reload with a number that actually makes sense. In order to toggle back to presentation view, you would simply click the On toggle in the upper right-hand corner. Now in my example, it remembers that I had my title and notes, but those would be blank by default and easy for you to change. At this point, many people would then want to print or save a digital copy, and that can be easily done through the Export drop-down in the upper right-hand corner. You can download the image as a JPEG, print it directly, or even export the underlying CSV data so that you can use the chart data in Excel. If you have a team of users who are working with YCharts, one of the many reasons why that's beneficial is the ability to push these charts, screens, watch lists, most of your work within YCharts to another member of the team. You can also tweet this out directly, post on stock tweets, or if you have a blog or website, you can embed the code right here with the image you need. The final step is the ability to save. In this case, we can go ahead and save, compare 10-2 Treasury yield spread to US GDP, so that we can easily pull that up in the future. Once that's done, we've effectively recreated this, and at this point we are done with our third example. I'd like to open it up to any questions that might have come in, Rushi.
Thank you, Zach, for giving us a closer look at the new fundamental charting tool. Before we jump into the Q&A, I do want to mention again that a recording of this webinar will be made available in the support topics section of our site in case you need to review anything we went over or to share it with your colleagues. Thanks for everyone who submitted questions. There are a few that I will bring up now for Zach to answer. The first one is, how are you classifying a recessionary period on the chart?
Great question. Yeah, that comes up a lot. So the process for deciding when these recessionary lines are going to display simply is taking a look at any time that U.S. GDP is shrinking in 2 consecutive quarters. So if we were focused in such a way on this line where we could see that more up close and personal, you would see that that was illustrated as well.
All right, great. The next question we have is, how do I add my logo to the chart?
Perfect question. Yeah, I may have mentioned something about that earlier. It's very simple. All you have to do is go ahead and send an image file to your support representative, and they can go ahead and include that on your account so that anytime you pull up a chart, you'll see your logo in the bottom left-hand corner of that chart.
All right, and then lastly, do you have a tutorial or manual available for using the fundamental charting tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have many different options from our support page and support topics to learn more about different portions of the tool. And in this case, we do have, for our chart section, advanced charting features and a couple of videos that will walk us through that as well. So don't worry, you're never far from some more information.
All right, great. Thank you, Zach, for covering those questions, and thank you all for attending today's webinar. We've seen a lot of interest in our new charting tool, and we really appreciate any feedback that you have. If you have any questions on the charting tool or you're interested in gaining access to them, please reach out to your YCharts contact. Thank you.